I'm Anthony Jewett from St. Mary's in Park City, and this is Rejoice in Hope, an audio series on discovering Jesus Christ. Humans love a good story. Our favorite people to study in history are the ones whose stories are the most fascinating. They're often more talented, more brave, or more capable than normal, and they have to overcome insurmountable odds in order to achieve historical success. These are the hallmarks of a great historical figure. The problem with humans, though, is that we tend to stretch the truth in order to strengthen our stories about other people. Here are a few examples. Albert Einstein, undoubtedly one of the greatest physicists to ever live. There's been a popular story that Einstein failed his grade school math class despite being a mathematical genius. This isn't true. Actually, Einstein was quoted as saying, "Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." Michael Jordan, widely regarded as the best basketball player of all time. There were popular claims that he was cut from his high school basketball team. And there are actually a few things wrong with this. First, he was a sophomore when he was placed on the JV team rather than the varsity team. Second, this was only the case because the head coach was looking for tall players, and Jordan was only 5'10" at the time. And third, he made the varsity team next year after having multiple 40-point games and growing 4 inches over the summer. Human history is rife with exaggerated stories just like these. The thing is, people like Albert Einstein and Michael Jordan are considered the greatest in their respective fields, and adding little details of rejection and obstacles to their life stories just seem to amplify their greatness. So as we've gotten better at studying history over time, we've been able to separate historical figures from the legends and the myths that surround them. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And this is also probably why people stopped treating the Gospels as historical texts after the Enlightenment. The Gospels are filled with stories that sound improbable and that don't match up with how history is often written down. And the problem with this is twofold. Just because something sounds improbable, like miracles or rising from the dead, doesn't mean we throw it out as being ahistorical. Also, and this needs to be reiterated, the Gospels were not historical biographies of Jesus Christ. They were stories written by followers of Christ explaining why they followed Christ. In our last few episodes, we explained and laid out evidence that points to the fact that the Gospels very well could be accurate historical accounts. So how do we reconcile our belief that the Gospels tell the truth with those who insist that we cannot treat the Gospels historically? Just as we should do with any conflict that arises in our lives, we should try to find the common ground that we share with people who disagree with us. If we're trying to understand the historical Jesus so that we can get to know the person of Christ better, then we have to point out the things that virtually all people agree with, even those who are not Christian and do not believe in Christian claims. We really come down to 3 distinct details that we can build off of. First, the historical person named Jesus actually existed. He's not a myth or a legend created by the Christian community. Second, he was executed under the power of the Roman Empire by means of crucifixion. Third, his followers have consistently claimed that he resurrected from the dead, regardless of whether or not it's true. So this is great. We have 3 things on which all people studying Jesus agree. Now, we can build a case using these details to defend our claim that the Gospels are telling us what actually happened. The reason why we know that a person named Jesus actually existed in history is because we have multiple sources that claim he existed, including those who do not benefit from the fact that he existed. The Roman historian Tacitus mentions that a man called Christus was put to death under the Emperor Tiberius through the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate. Because of this, his followers, who he referred to as quote-unquote Christians, began spreading what he called a mischievous superstition. At the same time, we also have the Jewish historian Josephus, working on behalf of the Roman Empire, who speaks about a wise man named Jesus who won over many Jews and Greeks and was condemned to a cross by Pilate. Interestingly, Josephus also says those who had first come to love him did not cease. We'll talk about that detail more in a second. Neither Tacitus nor Josephus were Christian. In fact, denying the existence of Jesus would have served both of their communities well. But the truth was well known at the time. Jesus was real, and he was famous. There are a handful of historians who doubt the existence of a historical Jesus, but their claims are considered fringe. We actually have more proof of Jesus existing than we do Alexander the Great. The earliest biography of Alexander's life was written 300 years after his death. We hear multiple sources speaking about Jesus within years after his death. If we were to treat the historical evidence of Jesus the same way we did Alexander, no one would deny he actually existed. In all of our historical accounts of Jesus, both Christian and non-Christian, there are references to him being put to death on a cross. Crucifixion was a method of execution reserved for non-Roman criminals, from thieves to dissidents. It would make sense historically for this to be the method of execution for a Jewish man who was causing an uproar in his community. The thing that should stick out to us, though, is that his followers also claim this historical fact. Crucifixion was a humiliating method of public execution, and the early disciples realized this. Immediately after his death, there was only a small group of followers, and they were discouraged and scattered. So what was it that brought them back together and allowed them to grow as a community? Obviously, it was their claim that he had risen from the dead. Skeptical historians will claim that this was a smart move by the early Christians to give credence to their movement. But this is something very, very important. They didn't have to make this claim. A lot of people today will tell you that they love what Jesus taught, but don't necessarily believe in the supernatural claims about him. Why couldn't these early Christians, these early followers of Christ, do the same? Clearly, Jesus' teachings were revolutionary and meaningful. And they wouldn't have been the first religion founded solely based on their founders' teachings. They could have been like Buddhism. They also could have stayed together simply to reflect on his life and his influence. In fact, that's exactly what the followers of John the Baptist did when he was put to death. They could have just treated him as another prophet, a great prophet, but another prophet. The only way Christianity worked and flourished in the way it did was if those disciples, those early followers of Christ, believed in the resurrection. Their conviction is what testified to the Christian claim, because they were willing to be put to death for it. So when do we know for sure that followers of Christ were claiming the resurrection? Well, the answer isn't clear, but we have some details to help us. Paul's letter to the Corinthians was written only about 25 to 30 years after the crucifixion. And in this letter, Paul states something of note. I handed on to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers at once, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. After that, he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one born abnormally, he appeared to me. The style of this claim to the resurrection is unlike other things that Paul has written. There is sufficient evidence here that this is a well-known formula that Paul is reciting, similar to the way that we recite the creed that's professed together at Mass. So through this formula, we can accurately claim that by 25 years after Jesus' death at the latest, the Christian claim to the resurrection was both well-known and widespread. But Paul adds a line to this formula that makes it personal to him. Last of all, as to one born abnormally, he appeared to me. This is exactly the purpose of us studying the history of Jesus. We're trying to find out what is true and accurate so that we can eventually establish a personal relationship with Christ. So, as we continue to add on to the pile of evidence for the historicity of Jesus, we should remember that all of this is simply so that we can allow him to reveal himself to us more fully.